That's a well that was drilled and plugged. It was never, casing was never set in it. That was a well that was drilled and abandoned. The wells that have a black dot are existing wells. If there's just a black dot only, that's a producer. If there's a northeast-southwest line going through it, that's an injector. And if there's a northwest-southeast line going through it, that's a plugged well, producer or injector. And I think you had a question about what all those symbols mean.
Yeah, thank you.
And just something for thought. You know, the fact that this area is shown to have some good production in it, but there's no guarantees. Nothing's a guarantee. And I think Mr. Russell is just trying to have the opportunity to develop. And what's the possibility he would develop this thing? You allow him to drill the wells, and he drills the wells, and there's nothing there. You're done. You know, but if you don't allow him to drill the wells, and that's always an unknown, and we're saying that there's potential reserves there because of the production in the area, but, you know, give him the chance, and if nothing's there, you know, it's all moot at that point, so. Any other questions I can answer?
Well, I was just going to say, so that's to say that they invest all this money into drilling these wells, nothing's there, they cap them, that's more money, and, I mean, they're behind already on everything, so, I don't know, I guess I feel for them, kind of, and is that just a risk they're going to take?
That's our industry. I mean, there are large investments made, and sometimes you find nothing. And the idea is that you'll find something along the way to pay for all the ones you found nothing on. And I think that's
just a hope.
That's a business risk that's taken in our industry all the time. And they wouldn't have to spend all of that investment money that's identified in my report. If you drill a few wells and don't find anything, you know, your investment's much lower where you determine whether there's something there or not.
Is that probably what's going to happen?
Well, I mean, if you drill a few wells and don't find anything commercial, you won't exploit the whole thing, I wouldn't think. You know, it's a matter of evaluating geological analysis and the wells that are drilled and seeing what, you know, makes sense. You don't just automatically go out there and drill all those wells. If the first few don't work out, then you reevaluate before you drill the entire thing up.
Do you spread out those test wells then? I mean, you don't do it all in one little spot, right? It's kind of spread out amongst the 160 acres to test?
Like is the 55 over 40 years, or is the 55 day one?
Well, if it was mine, I was not asked how to do it or, you know, that kind of thing. If it was mine, I would drill test wells in key locations around this 160-acre tract and see what I find, and then that would give me confidence to go ahead and do the rest of it.
Is that what they're planning to do?
Chief Brock will address that.
Okay.
We'll address that here in a minute. We're not quite finished with our
Okay,
presentation.
sorry.
That's all right.
Maybe,
we'll address the oil part of it in just a minute.
Yeah, that would be great if we could kind of keep
Right.
things moving, because we're, you know,
Sure.
well into the conversation, which has been great, so thank you.
I'll introduce Keith Brock. He's an attorney with our firm.
Great.
And you want to go ahead, Keith?
Good evening, everyone. I think I'll start out with just some of the questions that you all had. I mean, I think our job is to provide you with the information you need to make a decision, so we'll start with what matters to you. The first thing was the land use. That's something that's come up over and over again, and you were asked to consider the initial capital investment and whether our client's proposal that once the value of the property as a residential development exceeds its value as an oil lease, that capitalism would cause the wells to be plugged and for the property to be developed as residential. If you look at Exhibits 3 and 4 in Mr. Hutt's report, I'm going to direct you to the bottom table, the second to the right column. And that column depicts a cash flow. If you see it in 2015, if all of these wells are drilled and they produce as expected, the project will have a total cumulative cash flow of a negative $439,261. By 2016, only 1 year, a negative cash flow of $39,000. By 2017, only one full production year into the project, it's already generating positive cash flow, and that initial capital investment has been recovered. So your question is, if it's ready for residential development in the near future, is it true that you could feasibly plug these wells and develop it? Absolutely. The cost will be recovered relatively quickly if they cost and produce what's expected. So from that standpoint, this can be viewed as our client's intention is that it's only a preliminary use, a use until it can be developed for residential purposes. So I don't think that his ultimate goals conflict with the city's at all in their development plan. Another question was the health risks. And one question that you had was whether the wells that exist now pose a greater risk than wells that would be plugged later. And I think you were hitting on the point that wells drilled and plugged with current technology probably would pose less of a health risk than wells drilled and plugged under technology available more than a half a century ago. What I'm worried about is I don't want this application to be denied because of a abstract concern that something will happen or something that you've seen in the news. If you look at what we're actually doing and not some abstract plan, the city's built on top of plugged wells and you haven't experienced any problems. A half a century ago, the plugging techniques were much different than they are today. A half century ago, it was acceptable to drive a hedge post into the top of it. Obviously, that didn't adequately seal the reservoirs, and those wells did pose a risk. Whether that was done with the wells that you guys have already developed over, perhaps, we don't know. But today, that is not allowed. Just to walk you through what a well looks like, how it's drilled. The first step in the process is they will drill a larger diameter hole in order to set surface casing. Basically, they drill that hole to a certain depth below the bottom of the known usable water formation. Then they insert a larger diameter casing and they cement around that. The purpose of that is to isolate any usable water formations. Then they put the bit back on the drill bit or back on the rig and they drill to that to the total depth. Once that's done, they insert the casing, pump cement down to the casing that forces it around the outside. So now you have at the surface a large diameter pipe surrounded by cement, a smaller diameter pipe also surrounded by cement. And when it's produced, the way that you produce it is they actually lower a perforating gun down it, and that blows holes through the casing only at the interval that you're targeting. When the well becomes uneconomical and it needs to be plugged, the city of Gardner has specific ordinances that require that well to be filled completely with cement and for that well to be cut off 6 feet below ground level. That's not required for all wells in Kansas, but that is a city requirement that you all have been proactive enough to implement. So the answer to your question is, once you have a plugged well that amounts to what is basically a cement column, that would be much safer than a well with a hedge post driven into the top of it that may have been developed over in the past. You know, we've listed all these subdivisions, and like Scott said, the purpose of that was just to demonstrate the point that even though this industry may not be a known industry in the area, what we see is pushback because it's unfamiliar. It's not an obvious industry because we have all of these other areas. In certain parts of the world, this is one of the only economic, it's the primary business. You go out in western Kansas, there's not a lot of business. You come here, there are other areas. So it causes the oil industry to become more hidden. So we want you to realize that this is something that happens every day. This is something that has happened in my backyard, and there have been no adverse effects. And the reason we wanted you to understand that is because we don't want you guys to be worried about some abstract concern. If it's denied, it should be because you can point to a specific issue on these specific wells and this specific plan